Continuing with ERS fixtures, right? Our ERS, or our ellipsoidal reflector spotlight. In addition to shutters, an ERS is able to accept a pattern or a template. We can insert a stencil. And a gobo is nothing more than a cutout of steel. They can also be glass, but typically they're just steel. That's a steel cutout that's placed in a holder that then is inserted right around just before the shutter assembly. And you can buy a variety of these metal stencils, these gobos, right? And gobo stands for goes before optics, which means that we're inserting at the shutters and it's going before the optical lens train. It's in the focal point of the reflector, which allows us to project these images. And let's take a look at some gobos. Right, so let's look at this image. And when you first look at this image, I'm sure that you believe that the light is coming from the window and casting that shadow on the floor. But if you look a little more closely at that, you'll note that that is a gobo, right? If you look at the window, there are no fine lines between the windows. There is also a big center section, and that center section doesn't exist here, right? The windows are in squares and these are in rectangles. This is a gobo that's mounted overhead that's being projected onto the floor to make the illusion that light is coming through that window. And yes, maybe some light is coming through the window to light the fabric, to light this, right? And even to fall across our performer or the dress form. But the pattern on the floor is definitely a gobo. Let's look at our next one. When you look at this, you might think, well, the light is definitely coming through this window. But I will again tell you that it is not. If the light were coming through this window, there would be a shadow of the performer, and there is no shadow of the performer. Also, if we count the number of openings of the window, there are two. There are three openings on the floor, and these are very thin beams that form this window, and these are much thicker. This is a pretty good job and very convincing, and I'm sure that the audience bought it, but this is absolutely a gobo on the floor trying to create the illusion of what light coming through that window might look like. Now, gobos are not always defining windows in real spaces. Sometimes we just want them to provide a little texture. Now, the texture that's on the floor that is these branches may well be coming from this tree and tree branch that's here. I'm not sure. But the dappled blue, blue-green, blue-yellow that is modeling this hilltop is absolutely a gobo. It could be a blue wash then with this texture applied over top of it, or a colored gobo. There's several different ways to achieve that. But this is starting to move us into environmental texture, right? So as we look at this, we can see this one hard edge gobo that somebody didn't focus quite softly enough down in this corner, right? All the rest of them are nice and soft and modeled, and this gives us a sense that we are outside, right? We're somewhere outside where there are trees or leaves. The same is true here, right? We know that there's some outside something, this modeled texture. Gobos can provide depth and interest to a scene and also give us a sense of place and time, right? So this set for Into the Woods, it looks as though there are leaves that are stenciled in the painting, but there is also a texture that is overlaid. You can see on the front of this, there's texture over here in the lighting. You can tell that there is textured lighting that is also breaking up this space. We could also use a gobo to project a watery pattern, right? So this might be coming from a moving light or a piece of rippled glass. By changing this color from this blue-green, we could also change it to a red or a red-orange, and it could be fire or coals, right? So texture is not always realistic. Sometimes it's just emotional. If you were to look at the pattern that's on the floor, you'll just see these squares, right? These squares and rectangles. It's very angular. It's very sharp. It's also making very sharp lines in the haze, in the fog. And has something to say about the story, what we are watching. what we are watching is not necessarily going to be soft and kind, right? So the same would apply here. We're getting some texture by the fact that the light is coming through this bridge, but if you'll look on the floor, you'll also see these squares. These fixtures have a gobo in them. I can tell that because I can see the shaft of lights even before it gets to the bridge. There's some drama going on here, and this is not this scene may not end well. But if I look on the right, I can see the soft breakup pattern that's applied, this cyan that is being projected onto the set to break up and light this space. This is a much brighter, lighter, softer feel or softer application of a gobo texture. Sometimes gobos project realistic images, right? So we looked at this and our cyc is being lit with cyc lights, but this moon, I am almost convinced is a gobo. There is a lighting fixture somewhere that has this gobo inserted in it. It has been softened just a little bit, and it is projecting this image onto the cyc. You can see here too how we can project this image of wings, a realized image, and all the performer needs to do is to stand in front of it, and suddenly they're immersed in this image of having wings, right? So the use of gobos to project realistic, realized images, right? Now, earlier in the ERS section, I had spoken about the only way to change the size of the image is to change the lenses, and that's not completely true. ETC and most manufacturers offer a zoom fixture, right? So you can get a zoom in 50 to 25 degrees or 15 to 35 degrees, right? Where I can adjust the size by simply sliding the lenses against or opposed to one another, right? To change the size, right? I can then use the other lens to sharpen the image. So I have the ability to alter the size and still keep the fixture sharp. This uses more lenses. More lenses decrease efficiency, reduce efficiency. So these fixtures are typically not as bright as a fixed degree, a 26, 36, 50, 90, 14 degree fixture, right? They're not as efficient and not quite as bright. But if you need to make an image a very specific size, you can use a zoom fixture. They tend to be more expensive, as much as like $650 for these fixtures. So more in a few minutes.